now that with, I guess, entering into a post-COVID-19 situation when everyone's, taking the jab and starting to get vaccinated, I think the next challenge in a post-COVID-19 situation is the rise and the increasing tension of geopolitics. How do you see the rise of geopolitics in a post-COVID-19 era? And especially, there's a lot of discussion recently about the supply chain security with the US leading the debate on becoming less dependent on China. What's your take on that, and what's your observation?
Well, you're right. By the way, before I answer the geopolitical question, the cultural differences are very clear. And, in the West, it's become very clear that the emphasis is on rights. And I think in Asia, there's an emphasis on responsibilities over rights. And that you should wear a mask, not just to protect yourself, but to protect your fellow citizens. And you have a responsibility to protect them. Whereas in the West, many people feel if they wear a mask, they're denying themselves freedom. Of course, they ignore that they have a responsibility to their fellow citizens. And one point I make is that when I was ambassador to the UN from 1998 to 2004, in 1998, on the 50th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a former German Chancellor, Helmut Schmidt, proposed that there be a Universal Declaration of Human Responsibilities to match a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it's very sad that the Western countries pushed down the Universal Declaration of Human Responsibilities. But I think one lesson of COVID-19 is that we must push for greater acceptance of responsibilities. And so we should resuscitate the Universal Declaration of Human Responsibilities that was proposed by former Chancellor Schmidt, together with other leaders, including Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, by the way, of Singapore. Now, on the geopolitical question, it's important to emphasize that the US-China geopolitical contest is being fueled by larger structural forces. And, I'm glad, thank you for putting my book behind your shoulder, as I have my book behind my shoulder, Has China Won? And so it's driven, by a 2,000-year rule of geopolitics that the world's number one power always pushes down the world's number two power, which today is China. So US is pushing down China, that's normal. It's driven by the fear of the yellow peril. It's driven by a bipartisan consensus in the US that China has let the US down by failing to become democratic. So these are the structural forces behind it. COVID-19 added a new dimension to it. And certainly when Donald Trump was president, he actually thought that, hey, when COVID-19 broke out in China, China would be in deep trouble. China would suffer because it is not as advanced as United States. And so he was very laid back about the challenge. And that was, of course, a huge strategic mistake he made, because actually overall, in the eyes of the rest of the world, and must emphasize there are about, let's say, 7.5, 7.6 billion people in the world, and 1.6 billion live, or 1.7 billion live in US and China. There's 6 billion people who live outside. And most of the 6 billion people who live outside have been very impressed at how well China has managed the COVID-19 issue. So China's standing actually has gone up in the process of the COVID-19 episode. But I think you also referred to the deglobalization, I believe.
Yes. How the US is trying to break up the supply chain of China, or maybe cut it out. And that's also something that may actually lead to deglobalization instead of a globalization, opportunity for the world.
Well, I think once again, I would say we are still, haven't come out of COVID-19. So let's be a bit cautious about passing final judgments. But I don't predict, I know it is conventional wisdom in the West to say that there'll be deglobalization after COVID-19. I have an opposite point of view. I actually predict accelerated globalization after COVID-19? I mean, just ask yourself a very simple question. When COVID-19 is over finally, and you can finally travel, what do you think most people in the world will want to do? They'll say, hey, I was locked up in my country for 15 to 16 months. Guess what? I can now finally go to the Antarctic. I can finally go to the Arctic. I can, go and see the Grand Canyon in Arizona. I can go and see the springtime flowers in Japan. I'm going to go. And so you will see that travel will come back with a real vengeance. And so in that sense, that's one of the primary drivers of globalization. And in terms of trade, actually, China will continue to grow its trade with the rest of the world. And China today is the most confident country in the world when it comes to globalization. China believes it can compete with anybody. And so already you see that, China trades far more, in much more countries, more than United States does, right? And so when the only danger of deglobalization is some kind of detachment between the US and Chinese economies. I think there's a limit to how far it can go, but certainly the US will become less reliant on China in many, many critical areas. So that might happen, but if there is greater detachment or delinking between the US and Chinese economies, the US might find that the US economy might become deglobalized, but the Chinese economy will become more globalized. And that actually is unwise for the United States to do that. So I would say the United States should think very, very hard whether or not the trade war has benefited the United States. Actually, it hasn't. And when Joe Biden was a candidate, he himself said in the 2019 election campaign that the US-China trade war has not helped the American workers, has not helped the American consumers, has not helped the American farmers. So he should basically stop it, but he cannot, because the consensus in Washington, D.C. is against China. So Biden's hands are tied.